So this is the woman everyone's been whispering about. The voice sliced through the scorching afternoon like a provocation thrown into dry brush, sharp, reckless, and meant to ignite something dangerous. The circle tightened around her immediately, boots grinding into the dirt as if the men wanted the sound itself to carry their challenge. A few of them exchanged smirks. Others folded their arms. All of them watching her with the kind of anticipation reserved for a spectacle rather than a person. Before we get started, be sure to subscribe to Hero Tales by Jacob channel so you never miss these fascinating tales of courage. And let us know in the comments where you're watching today. At the center stood Harper Lane, her spine straight, her jaw set, her hands resting loosely at her sides, too calm for the tension that hung in the air. Dust swirled around her ankles and clung to the sweat on her skin, drifting upward in thin veils every time someone shifted. The recruits had formed a human barrier around her, shoulders brushing, elbows jutting outward, subtle enough to feign innocence yet deliberate enough that she felt the message behind it. They wanted her rattled. They wanted her flustered. They wanted her small. But Harper did not give them that. Her silence alone became a challenge. An unexpected one. The men had expected protests, excuses, maybe even fear. Instead, they received a steady, unbroken stare that made the heat feel heavier, the air feel tighter. That silent refusal, the kind born not from defiance but from discipline, set several of them on edge even before anything began. Someone behind her snickered, low and derisive. Look at her. Doesn't even blink. Another tapped the toe of his boot near her heel. Maybe she's already frozen. Maybe she regrets coming here at all. A ripple of low laughter followed, but none of it reached Harper. She inhaled slowly, letting her breath steady into the same familiar rhythm she had mastered long ago, during midnight swims beneath black waters, during desert raids where silence kept her alive, during the nights when memories pressed so heavily against her ribs she feared they might break. She had been Navy Special Operations, trained with men who had seen hell and had marched back out of it without complaint. She had survived storms these recruits couldn't imagine. Every scar, every ache buried deep inside her, had been carved by a battlefield that did not forgive hesitation. So their taunts now felt like a breeze scraping past an iron wall. Still, they kept closing in. The circle was not just a test, it was a statement. A reminder that they believed she didn't belong. To them, this dusty training yard in Nevada was a proving ground where they could expose her weaknesses. A woman in a place they thought belonged to men. A newcomer they assumed had slipped through the cracks of a system that should have rejected her from the start. But Harper knew something they didn't. She had endured trials far harsher than the arrogance surrounding her now. What loomed before her was not danger. It was merely ignorance dressed as bravado. The sun glared against their uniforms, casting long shadows across the dirt. Sweat trickled down Harper's temple. She didn't wipe it away. She didn't move at all, her stillness intentional, a way to keep control, to anchor herself in the moment while their jeers grew sharper. Her breath deepened as memories flickered at the edges of her vision. Faces of the ones she'd trained beside in places far from here. People who had become more than comrades. People who had trusted her, who had carried her weight when exhaustion nearly broke her knees, who had fallen long before they deserved to. The laughter around her didn't pierce her. Not compared to the silence she'd endured during memorial ceremonies, standing at attention as the flag-draped coffins of her friends were lowered into the earth. Nothing these recruits could do would ever outweigh those moments. Say something, one of them barked suddenly, stepping closer until his chest nearly brushed hers. Cat got your tongue? Harper didn't even tilt her head. That only frustrated him further. His grin stiffened into annoyance. Thought so. He feigned a strike toward her shoulder, but Harper remained immovable, as if her body had fused with the ground. It wasn't bravado. It wasn't stubbornness. It was calculation. She studied angles, spacing, foot placement, small details most people overlooked. She saw the twitch of a knuckle, the weight shifting to a heel, the uneven breath that betrayed hesitation. Around her, several of the men exchanged glances. A few of them realized, too late, that the situation had shifted. What they had assumed was passivity was control. What they had mistaken for intimidation was preparation. The shove, when it finally came, was harder. A shoulder rammed into her from behind, forcing the air around the circle to constrict further. Dirt kicked up around her ankles as two others leaned in, closing the last slivers of space. The tension crested like a wave about to break. Harper exhaled once. Slow. Centering. Then everything moved at once. Her left foot pivoted, sliding across the dirt in a motion so fluid it barely drew attention until the moment impact occurred. The recruit who'd shoved her was suddenly airborne for a breath, then slammed onto the ground with a thud that echoed through the yard. Gasps erupted around her. Before their shock could settle, Harper redirected another grasping hand, twisting the man's momentum against him. An efficient throw, clean and controlled. Dust plumed upward as his back hit the earth. Not a single word left her lips. The circle broke. Boots shuffled back. The bravado drained. The heat felt different now, not oppressive, but electrifying, charged with disbelief. Harper stood exactly where she had begun, breath steady, posture unchanged. She did not smile. She did not taunt. She simply existed in the center of the yard like an immovable truth. And the recruits, staring at her with wide eyes and reddened faces, understood for the first time that they had never cornered prey. They had cornered a warrior. For several long seconds, no one dared to breathe. The dust was still settling around the two recruits now sprawled across the training yard, their stunned expressions mirroring the disbelief spreading through the entire circle. What had begun as a display of dominance had flipped so quickly, so fluidly, that several of them hadn't even registered the moment of transition. One blink, they were closing in. The next, they were backpedaling, hands half raised as if unsure whether to defend themselves or surrender entirely. Harper Lane remained at the center of it all, not triumphant, not boastful, simply steady, her breath measured, her gaze unwavering beneath the harsh Nevada sun. The heat pressed against her shoulders like a physical weight, but she did not shift, did not seek shade, did not look away from the recruits who were now struggling to reclaim their composure. A few feet away, one of the fallen men pushed himself upright, groaning as he brushed dirt off his uniform. His eyes darted to Harper, then quickly away, unable to hold her gaze for more than a heartbeat. The second man remained seated, his chest rising in uneven breaths, bewilderment etched across his features. It wasn't just embarrassment that coated the air. It was the dawning recognition that whatever assumptions they'd made about her strength, her experience, her right to stand among them, had been shattered in an instant. Someone finally muttered, "What the hell was that?" Another answered under his breath, "Something we weren't ready for." But Harper wasn't listening to their voices. Not really. She stood still as a statue, her mind shifting between the present and the memory-laden corners of her past. For a moment, she wasn't staring at the recruits around her. She was staring at the desert from another lifetime, feeling the grit of Afghanistan beneath her boots, hearing the distant thrum of rotor blades that once carried her team across hostile terrain. The faces of those who'd walked beside her flickered like silhouettes at twilight, strong, determined, unbreakable, and gone. She inhaled slowly, grounding herself. The past could rise like a tide, but she had long learned how to let it ebb without drowning in it. A movement at the edge of the crowd drew her focus. One of the older recruits, broad-shouldered, mid-30s, eyes weathered from some life he never talked about, took a cautious step toward her. His name was Mason Carter, a former police officer who joined the program with high hopes and even higher skepticism about women entering elite-level training. His voice when he spoke was surprisingly steady. "Where did you learn moves like that?" Harper didn't answer right away. Instead, she let her gaze rest on him, a long, assessing look that made several others shift uncomfortably even though it wasn't directed at them. When she finally broke her silence, her voice was calm, even, controlled. "Places you don't want to be," she said simply. The words weren't meant as intimidation. They were simply true. And somehow, that truth chilled the air more than any threat could have. Mason exhaled, his shoulders loosening in a way that suggested he understood more than he spoke. He wasn't the type to be impressed easily. Yet now, he nodded, once, slowly, almost as if acknowledging that he had misjudged her long before today. Before he could respond, another recruit, this one younger, jittery, the type whose confidence came more from noise than ability, stepped forward with renewed anger flaring in his eyes. "You think that proves anything?" he snapped. "You got lucky. Anyone can pull off a cheap throw if you catch people by surprise." A few of the others winced. The arrogance felt forced now, brittle around the edges. But the young man clung to it anyway, puffing himself up like a cornered animal pretending to be twice its size. Harper didn't rise to the bait. She turned her head slightly, her expression unreadable. Luck had nothing to do with it. He scoffed. Says you. Her jaw tightened, the first flicker of irritation she'd shown since the beginning of the confrontation. Not from his words, but from his ignorance. He couldn't fathom what it meant to fight for survival, to make calculated decisions under pressure so intense it could crush the strongest minds. He didn't know what it took to move with precision when one wrong step meant someone didn't make it home. If you want a demonstration, Harper said quietly, you're welcome to step in. The circle went still. Several heads whipped toward the young recruit. His eyes widened for a split second, just long enough for everyone to see the fear flicker, but then he forced a laugh that didn't quite reach his eyes. I'm not stupid, he muttered. I'm not getting thrown around like them. Harper didn't respond, didn't need to. The silence that settled after his retreat made the message clear enough. He had issued a challenge without the courage to uphold it. In that stillness, another voice broke through. This one calm, authoritative, carrying across the yard like a quiet command. That's enough. All heads snapped toward the source. Standing at the edge of the training ground was Sergeant Daniel Reeves, the instructor in charge of the program. A man with a stern jawline, sunburned skin, and a reputation for pushing recruits until their bones felt ready to crack. He wasn't the type to intervene unless absolutely necessary, which meant he had been watching long enough to understand exactly what had transpired. Reeves strode toward them, his boots kicking up controlled bursts of dust. The recruits instinctively straightened, forming rigid lines and clearing space without being told. His eyes flicked to Harper first, just long enough for her to register a flicker of acknowledgement. Not praise, not approval, but recognition, as if he already knew more about her background than anyone else here, and nothing he'd just witnessed surprised him in the slightest. Then he surveyed the rest of the recruits. His silence stretched just long enough to tighten every pair of shoulders in front of him. Anyone want to explain why two of my recruits are on the ground? He finally asked, while the person you were trying to intimidate is still standing? No one spoke. Reeves' gaze sharpened. I didn't think so. He folded his arms, his tone dropping lower. If you think elite training is about ganging up on someone, you're wrong. If you think it's about proving who's toughest, you're wrong. And if you think underestimating someone makes you strong. He let the sentence hang, unfinished, but razor sharp. You're dead wrong. Mason swallowed hard. The younger recruit looked like he wanted to disappear. Reeves stepped forward, stopping only a few feet from Harper. Lane. She met his eyes. You did exactly what you were trained to do, he said. And you did it with control. Around them, the recruit stiffened. Hearing Reeves acknowledge her skill carried more weight than any victory she could have claimed. Get back in formation, he ordered sharply. Boots scrambled, dust lifted, and within moments, the circle dissolved into neat, tense lines. Harper moved toward her place at the end of the row, her expression neutral, but inside her chest, a quiet storm still churned. Not from anger, not from fear, from memory, from the ache of everything she had carried to get here. What the recruits had witnessed was just a glimpse, not of violence, but of survival. And though the yard had returned to order, the lesson lingered in the air like heat waves rising off sun-baked ground. Harper Lane had nothing to prove. But today, without a single word spoken in anger, she had shown them exactly who she was. The rest of the afternoon unfolded under a simmering tension that no one dared to acknowledge aloud. Even as the recruits marched across the yard, boots thudding in unison, the atmosphere felt different, heavier, sharper, charged with the memory of what they had witnessed. Sergeant Reeves led them through drills with his usual merciless efficiency, but every now and then, eyes flicked toward Harper Lane at the far right of the formation. She moved without hesitation, every step precise, every motion efficient. No wasted energy, no unnecessary strain. She had learned long ago that efficiency wasn't just strategy, it was survival. Her muscles responded automatically, guided by years of repetition carved into her bones like a second language. Yet even as she performed the drills flawlessly, a part of her remained elsewhere. Her mind drifted back, unbidden, to a night lit only by the faint glow of distant flares, where sand whipped into her face as she crouched behind a crumbling wall. A radio crackled with static in her ear. A teammate, Garrett, always too reckless for his own good, had whispered a joke to steady her nerves. She remembered the warmth of his voice, the strange comfort of humor in places where laughter had no business surviving. That memory stung now, sharp as glass under the skin. Because Garrett was gone, and she was here. Harper blinked the memory away before it could root too deeply. She forced her breathing to steady as the recruits jogged in a wide arc across the field. Sweat trickled down her back beneath her training gear, her boots striking the ground rhythmically. She let the physical motion guide her away from the past, at least for now. By late afternoon, Reeves finally called for a break. The recruits dispersed toward the water station, collapsing onto benches or dropping into the scarce patches of shade like men twice their age. Even the loudest among them sat quietly now, subdued by heat and humiliation. Harper approached the table last, taking a cup of water but not sitting. She preferred to stand. Movement kept her grounded, kept her from sinking back into memories she had not yet learned to silence. Mason Carter approached her, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his wrist. He hesitated, clearly trying to choose his words carefully. "You handled yourself well today," he said at last. "Better than most of us would have." Harper didn't look at him. She took another drink of water, letting the coolness settle in her throat before speaking. "It wasn't about handling anything," she said. "It was about ending something before it escalated." Mason nodded slowly. "Still, you shouldn't have had to." She finally turned toward him. "People rarely have to. But they do." He exhaled through his nose, a tired sound that said he agreed but didn't know how to fix any of it. "For what it's worth," he said, "not all of us think you don't belong here." Harper tilted her head, studying his face. Mason had the hardened look of someone who'd seen loss too, different from hers, perhaps, but loss all the same. His eyes carried a quiet fatigue, the kind earned from nights he didn't talk about. She respected that silence more than any words he could offer. "I know," she replied. He opened his mouth as if to say more, but Reeves' sharp whistle cut across the yard. Back in formation. The reprieve was over. The recruits scrambled to their positions. Harper took her place at the end of the line once again, her mind returning to the present as Reeves paced in front of them. "We're moving into team drills," he announced. "Pair up." Immediately, the recruits began choosing partners, some gravitating toward familiar faces, others rushing toward friends out of habit. Harper remained still, watching the clusters form. She waited for someone to approach her, knowing few would, knowing even fewer would do so without hesitation. To her mild surprise, Mason stepped forward. He stopped in front of her with a half shrug. "If you'll have me," he said. The corner of her mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but the closest she'd come all day. "I've worked with worse." Mason snorted. "I'll take that as a compliment." Reeves didn't waste time. "Each pair will run tactical coordination drills. Movement, communication, coverage. Lane, Carter, you're up first." A ripple of curiosity swept through the recruits as Harper and Mason stepped forward. They knew Harper was skilled. They had the bruises to prove it, but working with a partner required something different. Trust, synchronization, communication. Reeves barked instructions, outlining the scenario. Targets placed around the yard, timed movement between obstacles, silent signals for coordination. Harper listened, but her body was already preparing, mapping the field in her mind, calculating angles, memorizing distances. Mason stood beside her, rolling his shoulders, cracking his neck, readying himself in a more visible way. When the whistle blew, Harper moved first, not out of dominance, but instinct. Mason was quick to follow, matching her pace almost perfectly. They slipped between obstacles with surprising ease, Mason covering her flank whenever she took point, Harper signaling directions with subtle gestures that he grasped almost immediately. It was as if they had trained together before. Even Reeves paused his pacing long enough to raise an eyebrow. The other recruits watched in silence as Harper slid behind a barrier, her body angled just right to avoid exposure. Mason mirrored her, offering support where it was needed without overcrowding her space. Their communication was seamless, nothing spoken, everything understood. When they reached the final marker, Harper lifted her hand briefly, signaling Mason to halt. He froze, steady as stone. She stepped forward, tapped the target, then lowered her hand. The drill was complete. The silence afterward was almost reverent. Reeves checked his stopwatch, his lips pressing into a thin line. Then he looked up at the rest of the recruits. That, he said firmly, is what teamwork looks like. A flicker of pride, not for herself, but for the execution of something clean, precise, controlled, passed through Harper's chest. She exhaled slowly, letting the adrenaline drain from her limbs. Mason nudged her lightly with his elbow. We make a good team. She didn't respond, but the steady way she met his gaze was answer enough. As they walked back toward the formation, several recruits stepped aside to let Harper pass. Not out of fear this time, but something different. Respect. Acknowledgement. Maybe, for the first time, understanding. Harper Lane didn't seek validation. She didn't crave acceptance. But as the sun dipped lower in the Nevada sky, casting long shadows across the training yard, she sensed a shift, small but meaningful. The others no longer looked at her as an outsider. They looked at her as someone who had already earned her place. The evening light crept across the training yard, softening the edges of the obstacles and bathing the field in a muted gold. The scorching heat had finally begun to ease, though the ground still radiated warmth with every step. Sergeant Reeves dismissed the recruits for the day, and the group dispersed slowly, some limping, some groaning, most silent. It had been a grueling session, but the exhaustion wasn't what weighed most heavily on their minds. It was her. Harper Lane walked across the yard with the same measured calm she'd carried since sunrise, but today the air shifted around her differently. No one attempted to block her path. No one muttered insults beneath their breath. The tension that had once surrounded her had dissolved into something quieter, more watchful. Even the men who had mocked her that morning found themselves unconsciously stepping aside as she passed. She didn't revel in it. Respect was not a prize she chased. It was something earned through consistency, discipline, and character, not theatrics. Still, she felt the shift. As she approached the barracks, the faint hum of conversations floated through the cooling air. Recruits leaned against railings or sat on the concrete steps, exchanging quiet remarks about the day's drills. It wasn't like earlier, when voices rose boldly out of arrogance or bravado. Now, their discussions were subdued. Thoughtful. Harper knew some of the whispers were about her. It didn't bother her. She'd learned long ago that curiosity was inevitable, and far easier to handle than hostility. She climbed the steps to the barracks entrance, her boots thudding softly against the metal. Inside, the long hallway stretched ahead, dimly lit and quiet. Most rooms remained open as recruits changed out of their gear, some glancing up when she passed, but quickly looking away, unsure whether to greet her or stay silent. Halfway down the hall, she heard Mason's voice behind her. Lane. She turned, watching as he jogged up the steps, sweat still clinging to his shirt. His breathing was steady, but his expression was heavier than it had been earlier. You got a minute? He asked. Harper nodded, leaning slightly against the wall as he stopped a few feet away. Mason rubbed the back of his neck, searching for words. Look, I know today was a lot. For everyone. And I guess I wanted to say, he paused, exhaling. You didn't deserve any of that. Harper's eyes softened slightly, though her posture remained upright. Things happen. People test boundaries. It's human. Maybe. Mason glanced down the hallway, ensuring no one else was listening. But what happened earlier wasn't just testing boundaries. It was disrespect. And I should have said something before it got as far as it did. It's not your job to fight my battles, she said. No, Mason agreed. But it's my job to hold other men accountable when they cross a line. That's something I didn't do soon enough. Harper didn't respond immediately. She studied him for a moment. His sincerity, the weight in his voice, the tension lingering around his shoulders. Mason Carter was not a man who apologized easily. He wasn't built that way. But he was the type who recognized when he was wrong. And he was trying. Thank you, she finally said. But I'm fine. He let out a short laugh. Yeah, I figured that out earlier when you threw Jenkins into the dirt so hard he nearly swallowed a mouthful of gravel. Harper said nothing, but the faintest flicker of amusement crossed her eyes. Mason leaned against the opposite wall, folding his arms. The hallway was empty now except for the two of them and the hum of the old lights overhead. Can I ask you something? He said. She lifted an eyebrow. You can ask. Where did you learn to fight like that? Reeves knows something about your background. Anyone can see it in the way he looks at you. But the rest of us, we're just guessing. Harper was quiet for a moment. 2. Quiet. Mason realized instantly he had touched something delicate, something layered, something she didn't let people near often. Finally, she spoke. I served, she said simply. Mason nodded slowly. I kind of figured. But special forces? She didn't confirm. She didn't deny. Her silence, however, said enough. Mason let out a long breath. I had a partner like you once. When I was on the force, guy could read a room before anyone else. Move like he saw danger before it showed up. People like that, they're molded by things they don't talk about. Harper's gaze drifted past him, unfocused. He continued quietly. My partner didn't talk about it either. Something in Harper's expression shifted. The tiniest flinch, invisible to most, but not to someone who knew the look of buried pain. What happened to him, she asked. Mason stared at the ground. We both responded to a call one night. Routine. Should have been easy. But it wasn't. He swallowed hard. I made it out. He didn't. Harper understood instantly. Not the details, but the weight behind them. Law spoke a universal language. I'm sorry, she said. Mason gave a small nod. Yeah, me too. Silence stretched between them. Not uncomfortable, but shared. Two people who carried ghosts, recognizing those ghosts in one another without needing an invitation. Harper pushed off the wall. Get some rest, Carter. Mason managed a faint smile. You too. She walked down the hall toward her room, her steps quieter now, her thoughts heavier. The encounter had stirred something she tried, most days, to keep buried. The faces of the fallen flickered again. Garrett, Tomas, Hughes, names etched permanently into the corners of her mind. They followed her everywhere, silent companions she neither welcomed nor wanted to lose. Inside her room, Harper sat on the edge of her bed, unlacing her boots slowly. She let the quiet settle around her, let her shoulders relax, let the emotional residue of the day surface without drowning her. Her hands stilled. Her breathing deepened. The room was dim, lit only by the fading glow slipping through the narrow window. Outside, the Nevada sky began its slow shift toward night. Purple, fading orange, streaks of gold dissolving into shadow. Harper lay back on the mattress, staring up at the ceiling. The day had been long, draining, familiar. Another reminder that past wounds never truly stayed behind. They simply grew quieter until the world poked at them again. But beneath all of that, the tension, the memories, the shifting dynamics, Harper felt something she hadn't sensed in a long while. Possibility. The smallest hint that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't walking this path alone. Not anymore. Night settled over the training compound with a quiet heaviness, draping itself across the Nevada desert like a thick, dark blanket. The barracks, usually buzzing with late-night chatter or the muffled clatter of restless recruits, had gone unusually still. Exhaustion had silenced even the loudest among them, leaving only the distant hum of generators and the soft whisper of wind brushing against the metal siding. But Harper Lane remained awake. Sleep rarely came easily. It hovered just out of reach, pulled away by memories that returned uninvited, pressing themselves into her consciousness until her pulse quickened and her chest tightened. Nights were the hardest, when the world quieted and her guard slipped, when the ghosts of the past found their way back through the cracks she worked so hard to seal. Tonight was no different. Harper lay on her back, her hands resting loosely over her stomach, staring at the ceiling as though answers might be carved there. The faint glow from the hallway slipped beneath her door, cutting a thin line across the floor. Shadows shifted with every subtle sway of the barrack structure, and each creak sounded sharper in the silence. She closed her eyes, and instantly, she was somewhere else. Sand whipping sideways. The sharp smell of burning rubber. Garrett's voice breaking through static. The hollow thud of an explosion somewhere beyond the ridge. The frantic pounding of her heart as she waited for the confirmation that never came. Lane, get down. Her breath hitched. She opened her eyes again, her chest rising too fast. It was the barracks ceiling above her. Not a battlefield. Not the night she lost her team. But the imprint of those moments clung to her tightly, refusing to loosen their grip. Harper swung her legs over the edge of the bed and stood, slipping into her boots out of habit rather than necessity. She needed air, movement, space, something to keep the memories from swallowing her whole. When she stepped outside, the night air hit her skin like a cool balm. The compound lights cast muted halos across the empty yard, illuminating the training structures in pale blue tones. The obstacles, the sandbags, the wooden barriers, all looked gentler under the moon, stripped of the harsh edges that defined them in daylight. Harper walked toward the far end of the field, drawn to the quiet. Each step pressed lightly into the dirt, soft compared to the pounding rhythm of drills earlier that day. She kept her breathing steady, though her thoughts still churned like unsettled water. She didn't hear footsteps at first, but a soft crunch behind her made her pause. Lane. She turned. Mason Carter stood a few yards away, his posture relaxed, hands tucked into the pockets of his training pants. His expression wasn't intrusive or concerned, just aware, as though he had sensed the shift in the air the same way she had. You all right? He asked. Harper hesitated, not because she didn't know the answer, but because she wasn't sure how much she was willing to reveal. I couldn't sleep, she said finally. Mason nodded slowly, stepping closer, but keeping a respectful distance. Yeah, I figured. A few of us are dealing with our own ghosts. Harper's gaze fixed on him. You? He shrugged one shoulder. Some nights are worse than others. Tonight happens to be one of them. Silence settled between them. Comfortable, in a way. Understanding, without explanation. Harper looked out across the training yard. I didn't expect today to go the way it did. Mason chuckled softly. I'm guessing none of us did. Harper's jaw tightened the way it always did when she tried to articulate something that mattered. I don't like attention, and I definitely didn't ask for what happened. I know, Mason said, but sometimes the world forces you into the spotlight. Doesn't mean you wanted it. Doesn't mean you enjoyed it. Just means you were the strongest person in the room. She looked at him carefully. Strength isn't always what people think it is. You're right, Mason replied. Strength is surviving things that would have broken someone else. And you walk with something the rest of us can feel, but don't quite understand. For the first time in a long while, Harper didn't look away. Instead, she said quietly, I lost people. Good people. People I trusted. When I fight, when I train, when I push myself, sometimes I'm doing it for them. Mason didn't interrupt. He simply listened. They didn't get to come home, Harper continued. But I did. So I owe it to them to be better. To be strong. To be present. Even when it hurts. Mason exhaled, the sound soft in the quiet night. Then you honor them every day. The simplicity of the statement struck her deeply. No pity. No assumption. Just understanding. The moon dipped lower across the horizon, casting long shadows across the yard. Harper glanced up at it, then back at Mason. You didn't have to check on me, she said. Maybe not, he replied. But I wanted to. A faint breeze swept past, brushing against her arms. For a moment, it felt like the desert of another lifetime again, but gentler. Less hostile. Harper's shoulders loosened. Not much, but enough for Mason to notice. He smiled, just slightly. You know, he said, I think you're going to change this place. Harper raised an eyebrow. How so? People follow strength, Mason said. Real strength. Not the loud, fake kind they threw at you earlier. The kind that makes people want to be better. He paused. We saw that today. Harper didn't respond right away. She stared across the training yard, watching the wind carry small ripples of sand over the ground. Maybe, she said at last. Or maybe I'm just surviving one day at a time. Sometimes, Mason replied. That's all leadership really is. Harper considered that. For the first time since she'd arrived at the compound, she felt something shift inside her. Not a fading of grief, not a loss of the weight she carried, but a quiet acceptance that she wasn't navigating this alone anymore. Not completely. Mason stepped back, giving her space. I should get some rest, he said. We've got hell waiting for us tomorrow. Harper nodded. You go? I'll stay a little longer. He hesitated, then offered her a small, sincere smile. Good night, Lane. Good night, Carter. When he walked away, the quiet returned, but it felt different now. Not as heavy, not as suffocating. Harper closed her eyes and inhaled deeply. For once, the memories did not crash over her like a wave. They lingered, yes, but they didn't drown her. Not tonight. She whispered inwardly, to the faces she carried with her, I'm still here. I'm still fighting. And as she opened her eyes to the wide, silent yard stretching beneath the moonlight, Harper Lane felt something she never expected to find in this place. A second chance. A new beginning. A path, quiet, steady, and hers to walk.